If you thought the previous 4 seasons of Invincible were brutal, season 4 literally just proved that the creators of the show, are not pulling any punches whatsoever when it comes to just breaking Mark Grayson's psyche. We got the Viltrumite War this season, we got the introduction of Thrag, and we saw Mark make decisions that just completely changed who he is as a hero. In fact, like, when I actually went back to look at some, like, to look at what happened throughout the season so I could talk about things in chronological order, I was shocked at how much they actually ended up cramming into this before we even ended up getting the main space adventure. So right at the beginning of the show, we already had a lot, like I just said, and I want to run through them because there was a lot at the beginning. We have the dinner with Mark meeting Eve's parents. We have the fight with the dinosaur guy. I forget his name. I'm sorry. And we have the big problem with Eve finding out that she's pregnant. And then we have on one of the 2 alien species showing up randomly looking to steal some power from Earth or something like that, or just one alien. Then we had the alien species invading, you know? And I wanted to keep all of that kind of at the same part because there really is a little bit to break down with each one before we move on, because the story kind of breaks apart with that. For Eve, we will expand upon that towards the end, because we all know why, and after watching the season, why her powers aren't working, and we saw a pregnancy test right now. So one could assume that for whatever reason, that's why her powers weren't working. We just got a little bit of a teaser at the beginning of the season for that. I did want to talk about that dinner for a moment, though, because I actually, again, there was so much that was happening this season. I forgot that this was the first time that Mark kind of met Eve's parents, and as usual, the father kind of had a sour attitude towards him. It actually kind of reminded me of the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man with Gwen and her father and that whole, like, dynamic that they had. You know, you had the father having a tough conversation with Mark because he knows what Mark has been through. He knows who Mark is. He knows exactly who he is, and he wants nothing but to protect his own daughter, and just, he wants nothing bad to happen to Eve. I actually kind of understand that coming from his perspective, and the reason that this whole thing reminded me of Spider-Man is because of, like, he said something similar that Gwen's dad ended up saying to Peter. And of course, I'm paraphrasing over here. It's been a long time since I've seen the movie, but it was something along the lines of, hey, if you really care about my daughter, then you should consider how dangerous you are being around her. So you could add that to the whole conversation as to why Mark was kind of all down in the dumps. But then the aliens came back. And you know what's funny about this show, right? We've seen the fights against both of these creatures, and I'm going to talk about both of them, really. We've seen them so many times now throughout the show, and I'm sure we're not done. But Invincible does it so well to the point where I actually don't get tired of it. So they end up showing up, the Segwids, I believe they're called, and they want to take over the world, of course, right? They want to get a bunch of hosts, and the other aliens that showed up, they had an antenna so they didn't end up aging. And of course, the idea was the people on Earth wouldn't really destroy it. I'm going to talk about both of them at the same time. So you have 2 major storylines at first, right? You have Robot, who is majorly struggling for power, technically kind of being correct with his logic, but he has to take orders from a leader that isn't as smart. He disobeyed, and long story short, he and Monster Girl ended up getting stuck on the other side of a portal as it was closing. And for this, honestly, that I'm so invested in the story with Mark and Nolan and the gang that I hope we don't have an entire season or a section of a season put aside where it's just this story. I hope they just show back up one day and explain kind of what happened. But again, Invincible, they do tell really good stories to the point where I'm sure that I'll end up loving it either way. If I had to guess what's going to happen, Robot ends up taking them over. I feel like that there was a point acknowledging his struggle for power over here, and it would actually be pretty wild if he ended up switching sides because the aliens ended up like really needing Earth for something or something like that. I think that'd be pretty interesting. I don't think that would be the case, though. I could just see him taking them over. But I also don't know what he would end up doing with that. Maybe he would just stay there, help them. Then you could have a difficult subplot with him and Monster Girl, you know, Monster Girl wanting to go back to Earth while he wanted to end up staying on the other planet and helping people. I kind of think that would be a little bit fun to watch personally. But the more important part about this fight was that Mark made a kill move. And I know it's a different alien thing, but we're talking about both of them. And I actually think this is very significant for Mark's character, and I'm sure we're going to see more about it. The barrier that they had was about to break for one of the fights, and Mark had to either make a decision. He had to, like, kill the man with the host, or he had that person was an innocent man, or he had to sacrifice the world. I hate to say it, but Mark made the right call. If I was in his place, I personally wouldn't be able to do it. I wouldn't be able to sacrifice an innocent man no matter what the cause was for, but Mark's changed, and you could see that. You could see the hesitation in him, but he did it. And obviously trauma ended up coming from this, but this is the type of stuff that I was very interested in seeing throughout this entire season, guys, because at the end of season 3, Mark had that whole kind of speech where he said that he wouldn't hesitate to kill somebody if it meant for the betterment of his family or if somebody was threatening him. I believe at the time he kind of more meant like, right in your face kind of threats as like a conquest, I would say. But this was Mark kind of living up to what he said. I loved how powerful the moment was too, where he did it, where he just killed the man and everybody just kind of stopped because we all know what Mark did, right? And Cecil was watching all of that too. And then he said something to the extent of like, well, this is different than killing somebody like Conquest or Angstrom. This was an actual innocent man, and trauma like that ends up breaking people. And we see it as we continue through the season with Mark. I really, really, really like how they included this scene before we saw what was to come with this entire war. Mark has become throughout the series one of my favorite fictional characters of all time. But everything that we just spoke about was kind of at the beginning, right? And I know I jumped the gun just a little bit, but anyways, the first episode concludes with Conquest escaping. Shocking. Who could have possibly seen that one coming? We'll talk more about Conquest, but we take a pause from all of that, and then we actually end up going into space and diving into the story with Nolan and Alan. And I have to say, guys, this was the season where I really, really felt the pain of Nolan and kind of really bonded with his story as a viewer. I might as well touch on this now. We'll get to the entire thing with Debbie, but it's like, as I've become a fan of Invincible, I've seen like a lot of edits and things like that where people kind of talk about how sad they were for Omni-Man or just how sad his redemption story was or he deserved this, all of those types of things. Until this season concluded, I wasn't really on that train. Yeah, we saw Nolan regretting his actions. We saw him missing Debbie. We saw him trying to do better. The whole, I think I missed my wife thing, but they never really emphasized what Nolan was thinking internally until this season. And again, we'll talk more about that as we go through the story, but Earth is kind of right in not forgiving him for the most part. From an outside perspective, how could you possibly trust somebody like Nolan again? But because it is, like this is, of course, a fictional story, we know that Nolan is truly sorry for everything he's done, and his heart has kind of become more pure in a sense. So because of that, we're actually able to bond with the character and actually kind of feel as sad as he is. So I now look back at things like, for example, the scene in, I believe it's season 3 with Nolan crying to Mark as he's angry, like holding his neck saying like, why do I care about them? They were barely a species or whatever. They were insignificant. They shouldn't matter to me. Like, I'm not supposed to feel this way. How is this better? And when Mark expresses to him that this is how you should have felt on Earth, you can kind of see it going through his consciousness. Things like that hit much harder now with Omni-Man's story, and I really love the direction that they ended up taking Nolan's character. But anyways, like I said, I will open up more about that. But for now, we have a little bit of a look into actually Nolan and the Viltrumites' past. And the biggest takeaway was actually a little bit of a secret here, which is pretty cool. And I didn't end up catching it actually until I ended up seeing a TikTok about it. In order to bring their own kind into adulthood, they just have a crazy brutal fight. And now we can look back on season 1 too, and Nolan beating on Mark the way that he did was his way of telling Mark like he was an adult and ready for more and ready for his mission. We also learned that Nolan ended up getting his temper from his mother because the mother was beating Nolan in the exact same way that Nolan was beating Mark in the show, and the father was the one who had to stop her and tell her it was enough and Nolan was an adult. Nolan didn't have Debbie around to stop him, and perhaps that's actually why it got as bad as it was. But we also got a little bit of a deeper look into what happened with all of the Viltrumites, and of course, we learned a lot about the Scourge virus. It ended up taking them all out. It wiped up the entire race. It destroyed billions of people, and some of those people were also Nolan's parents. And can I just say, the picture of all of the bodies making up the ring on the planet is disgustingly beautiful. I don't mean that in the sense where it's like, oh my god, it's so cool that they're dead bodies, or so cool that they're dead. It's a fascinating picture for the story, and I think that it represents what happened to the planet very well when you end up looking at it. They used it tactically later on too. It's crazy that they all just kind of like became debris in the way. But anyways, we then got introduced to Thetis, and I believe this was his introduction this season. If we knew anything about him prior, it has escaped my memory. It was like I was seeing him for the first time. But to be honest with you guys, he might have been the only thing that I didn't like about the season. Nothing was wrong with his character or anything, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed his story. I actually just flat out really enjoyed the character. But the problem is, I couldn't unhear Optimus Prime. I think Invincible has some of the best voice casting, and best acting in some of the history of television. But I do think this one was a miss, and it was a big one. Optimus Prime in the voice is way too iconic for me to ignore. I didn't like hearing speeches about the war, or just what needs to be done in the voice of Prime. Go get the Viltrumites. Like, it took me out of the moment because I hear Optimus Prime, but I have to spend time convincing my own brain while watching that it isn't actually Optimus Prime. But either way, we quickly learned that he was the betrayer of the Viltrumites. We had some backstory scenes with him trying to explore kind of like alternate ways to what Thrag and the Admiral was doing without killing people and things like that. And I guess that he felt he was really the only one that could act. And in the present, he ended up telling Nolan that he had an improved version of the Scourge virus. And this one would end up working. Nolan, of course, ended up getting pissed off, understandably so in a way, because Thetis almost committed genocide. Now he has something that's going to be like, hey, Nolan, this is going to completely finish the job. But they came to an agreement that the new virus would be an absolute last resort. I didn't trust him, but this, his word ended up holding true to some extent. But since Nolan didn't want to unleash the virus, this is where they decided to start getting an army together to fight the Viltrumites and actually get the war going. And we have a small introduction to some of our new characters over here. We had primarily Space Racer and Zoe. I believe those two are the most prominent. I liked Space Racer. I like that, and a little bit off topic, but I like that no matter where you went, you saw glimpses of Nolan's past and him not being able to convince anybody else that he's changed because he's a Viltrumite and he did all these horrible things. And people ended up reluctantly working with him for the greater good. I like that all of that took place. So anyways, Space Racer, he was badass. His weapon was awesome. I don't know why he didn't shoot it more, but whatever. And I liked Zoe as well. I actually saw online that Zoe was kind of a hit or miss for a lot of people. I thought the story with the dad was a little bit unnecessary, but I thought it was kind of like, I just thought it was weird that she was kind of just some girl with her dad into space. But I did like the chemistry with the rest of the cast. Zoe in particular was very fun to watch, and I liked her when she joined up with the fights as well. But we do take a pause from all of them at this point because we aren't at the exact war just yet. I keep forgetting how much actually happened in all of these 8 episodes. So we take a small break a little bit, and we kind of go over to Machine Head, Titan, and New Assassin. And while I'm not necessarily a hater of those characters, I actually like them. I just felt that their story was a little bit small compared to our mains that we were following this season. Honestly, there really isn't much to break down. Oliver went to go on and fight Mr. Liu, and at the same time, Eve's powers still weren't working, and Mark ended up almost killed somebody again when the invasion happened at the same time. With all of that, Machine Head's group, they ended up getting back together, and I guess we'll probably just be seeing them in the next season. Again, it was just a little small compared to what we had this season. But anyways, after that, we take another break from the main story of the season with the whole Underworld episode. This one, I did see a lot of hate for. I saw a lot of hate for the entire episode. I actually didn't mind this one. I enjoyed learning about more of the universe and how things work inside the universe of Invincible. Also, I have to say, as a man of faith, I obviously see Catholic things going around on my social media like TikTok and all of that. I saw a lot of people talking about this like this is glorifying hell and how wrong that is. I don't know if this makes me a poor man of faith, to be honest, but I don't see it that way. This is fiction, and in this particular universe, heaven doesn't exist and the demons aren't as bad as Earth thinks. Like, I don't look too deeply into fiction. I find the story fascinating. It would be one thing if they were just like openly insulting religions and you could see the message behind that. It's just a story though. I won't lie, I did feel a little bit uneasy though about Satan in this universe kind of like being the good guy of the story. But it also at the same time was funny to listen to Mark hear everything about the demons not being bad and just him going, yeah, I'm not bowing down to Satan. But anyways, so Damien Darkblood interrupts a mission of Mark's. He called him back down to the underworld, and he was actually trying to call Nolan, it turns out. I like how he pointed out that they were kind of like basically the same. Like, oh, we got you. Okay, it's kind of showing that Mark is slowly becoming a little bit like his father. I thought it was a nice touch, but to be honest with you, and this is probably the whole reason why I personally understand the hate for this whole episode, is there really isn't much to talk about. Like, Damien was kind of funny at points with a mask. There was all of this build up in prior seasons to the underworld coming from Mark or whatever in other seasons, only for it to kind of like be a bunch of nothing. I did enjoy the fight of the episode at the end. Like, I'm not a hater of the episode. I enjoyed the episode. I do understand the hate for it. And it does look like we will get a little bit more of Damien Darkblood down the road, though, with the new mission that he's on. But anyways, this episode ended off with a banger, because after all of that, Mark ended up heading over to the surface. He finally gets to sit down with Eve, and they look right up, dude, and there is Nolan and Alan. I thought this was awesome, man. This was something that we have been waiting for since the end of the first season. Nolan actually being back on Earth, and I really enjoyed the route that they ended up taking this, dude. So it started off with him recruiting Mark to fight in the war, in which Mark was right when he had the conversation with Nolan where he's like, he didn't really have a choice in the matter because the Viltrumites were going to be coming anyways. But anyways, I also like that Mark was giving him a bunch of crap about seeing Debbie, to the point where Nolan actually was having second thoughts and might have not even been going through the door, but Debbie was the one who opened the door and ended up letting him in. And again, this was the part where a lot of us were waiting to see for such a long time, and it did not disappoint, dude. Debbie's entire speech was so well done. The voice acting was phenomenal. She really made you feel it. Like I was expressing at the beginning of the video, we know now that Nolan is truly sorry for everything that he's done, because we have that inside look to him, and he wants to do better. So we can connect to him more on that level. But I kind of like how hard he's being hit for the story, man. He deserves it. Like, I love that Debbie didn't hold back, punching him in the chest until she bled, refusing to help, like refusing his help with that cut, not giving like 1 ounce of remorse or love shown his way. It was brutal. I think the end of her just saying, to the extent, like, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was something like, get the fuck out, leave me alone. Like, brutal, man. And again, understandably so from Debbie, man. One of the other characters in the series, and I don't remember exactly who it was, but they ended up saying no matter how hard Nolan tries, he will never be able to earn forgiveness for what he did. And they're kind of right, man. I fully expect down the road to see Nolan sacrifice himself for Debbie at some point in space to kind of just show his love for her, because he wouldn't be able to do it through any sort of heroism besides that. I think that's something that's going to be coming down the road, and Nolan will either end up sacrificing himself for Debbie, or her, like, sacrificing himself for her along with Mark and Oliver for something. So anyways, all of our heroes leave Earth. Debbie has a big goodbye. They end up having a nice dinner. Eve keeps her secret, and they all end up taking off. It was pretty wholesome. We have a little bit of a wholesome moment with just some people kind of getting to know each other on the 2-week trip. We have even more uncomfortable conversations with Nolan. Oliver still pissed off at him. Mark's still pissed off at him. And this is the point, of course, where the series really picks up, guys. Out of nowhere, the Viltrumites just attack, right? They ruin the moment. We have 2 of them, and Conquest making his big return. And dude, that did not disappoint either. The guy is just such a well-done villain. So they have their first fight here, right? And there isn't much to break down about the fight in general. It's just, all I can say is it was super cool. It was super well done. I loved watching all of that. I always love Invincible fights. They're brutal. But we all know the rematch between Mark and Conquest is where the actual true hype was, right? And boy, that was disgusting. I have seen so many edits of Mark looking at Conquest and just flat out saying, like, and it was after he ended up threatening Eve, you are never breathing again. So that in itself was badass, but it held true. The guy grabbed his neck and did not let go no matter what happened to him, dude. They slammed onto a planet, and eventually, like, I love that as it continued on, Conquest was panicking more, and he drove his arms through Mark and just started ripping out his intestines. And guys, I have a very good stomach, okay? I have seen a lot throughout my life with experiences, and I can handle these things. This made me so uncomfortable to watch. I almost wanted to look away at some point, because it just kept going. And the voice acting, again, it just made this entire scene so much better. It was one of the more brutal things that I have ever watched in a show, which is weird for a cartoon. But something else that I didn't know that too, and the entire point of that is where Conquest was ripping through Mark's intestines. Apparently, he was panicking, trying to get to his heart because he knew that he was about to die. Chills, man. Chills. But yeah, like, that was actually one of the coolest things I've ever seen in a show. Like, dude, you are never going to breathe again. And that makes it come true. Like, I love Invincible so much, dude. It was so good. Anyways, with that episode, it concludes with Nolan and Oliver end up finding them when it was ending up being too late. We have Thetis also declaring war with the Viltrumites officially. We take a little bit of a break from the war, though. We have some nice wholesome bonding with a little bit of a rocky start between Nolan and Oliver. And I kind of like how it started with how upset Oliver was, and just it all turned into him literally asking about his mother and bonding with Nolan. I had to think about it for a second though, because when they were having their conversation about, like, Nolan just telling Debbie that his next relationship was a mistake, and which kind of meant Oliver would have been a mistake, I believe that Nolan was kind of just saying that to appease Debbie. Like, I know he said that, I just believe him, because what else is he supposed to say? Like, Debbie, your whole life was uprooted and destroyed, so I had kids with another woman shortly after. Like, of course he's supposed to say that he didn't care about her. But with everything that we saw in that arc separately, it was very clear that Nolan cared for Oliver. He loved Oliver and his mom and even all of their people, in my opinion. So they trained, they bonded, and it straight up seemed like Oliver kind of just forgave Nolan for everything and ended up accepting him at the end. It was just nice to see, man. And like, as a person, I kind of struggle with this a little bit, because Nolan deserves no forgiveness, but we just feel for him because, like, again, we have a deeper look into his heart here. We know the person behind Nolan right now. And for what happens with the war after that, I wish that we could dive deeper in it, to be honest. All I can really say is that we had some awesome fighting. It seemed like it lasted a really long time for the episode. Like, Invincible didn't hold back. And something else that I probably should have mentioned at the beginning of the video, I kind of just thought about it because I was thinking about the fighting scenes when I'm talking about it right here. I saw a lot of people really dogging on the Invincible writers or the Invincible creators for the animation. I didn't have an issue with it personally. It was good enough, and the story itself had me so invested that I didn't even notice anything bad about the animation while I was watching. People, of course, they have a right to hate it. I understand that. I've seen some like frames that people are talking about, but in my eyes, it seems a little nitpicky. For the fights, I enjoyed them. It was all pretty back and forth anyways until Thrag showed up, and man, Thrag did not disappoint. I heard a lot about him, okay? And I heard that what a great villain he was. And I've seen the design to him prior to the show, and I look at him, I never really thought anything was too special. So, of course, it ended up Mike being the character, and, like, dude, the guy has some aura. He was so well put together. He was so calm, so terrifyingly powerful. Everything about Thrag was done so well. So he shows up. The war is at an all-time high, and he recovered a recovered Mark ended up showing up with him. And then Nolan and Oliver ended up coming up as well. And Thrag ended up having to make a retreat back to Viltrum, but our main characters are met with an ambush with all of the Viltrums waiting in the ring of all of the other dead Viltrumites. That ended up catching me by surprise personally. I thought that was well done. It was a cool scene, but there is a little bit of a pause where Nolan and Thrag end up having a conversation at this point because Thrag tried to offer Nolan forgiveness and to join back to his original cause. Long story short, Nolan ended up refusing, of course, which, again, says a lot about his character. But something that Thrag mentioned did stick with me at the moment, okay? He said something to the extent, and again I'm paraphrasing, that all Thetis is doing is using him, and he wants all Viltrumites gone. I was kind of thinking that as well, because he kept saying stuff like, all the Viltrumites need to die, every one of them. It wouldn't shock me if he went for Mark, Nolan, and Oliver as well. But it seems like we'll never actually get to see what he was planning on doing because what comes next. So, Nolan grabbed Mark and Thetis, told Space Ranger to fire one of his shots through the planet, and they ended up actually destroying the planet's core together, blowing up the entirety of Viltrum. That whole thing was beyond sick. I loved watching it. The way Thrag panicked was awesome, and the response, it was even more insane. Thrag full-on went to, like, I'm going to end you mode, and just straight up ripped Thetis' head clean off. And when that happened, I was kind of thinking to myself, like, oh my god, everybody's probably going to die besides Mark, aren't they? But he destroyed everyone effortlessly. I was thinking maybe that's where Nolan had his redemption, but man, the show did such a good job of making him scary. He was about to kill Mark. He reached the point where he was about to kill Mark, but he decided to let Mark live because the actual numbers of the Viltrumites were even lower now. I think it was like 30-something. So since they didn't have a planet to retreat to, they ended up retreating to Earth. But our main characters didn't know that at this point. They were just guessing. So they ended up just panicking and rushing home because they made the assumption that that's where they would head, and they would head for revenge. And they get to Earth. They find nothing, right? Earth was there. It was totally okay. Things were happening normally, but everybody's on high alert. And this is where the season kind of slowed down for a lot of people. I wish I could expand more on the fight. It was just awesome, right? But I saw people complaining that the finale was underwhelming. I personally really enjoyed it. One of the things that I love about Invincible is that we kind of get, to some extent, a realistic display of heroes. And we kind of get to see an insight on how Mark has been affected by a lot of these things. And that's what the episode was about. I thought it was, I loved it, man. I thought it was a very well done finale. Like, dude, the entire season was full of Viltrumite war and space battles, and it was awesome. Nothing can underwhelm me at this point. So, anyways, I don't know about you guys, but I completely fell for Mark's first hallucination. When Thrag showed up out of nowhere, got his payback, and just ripped Debbie's head off, I actually froze. I couldn't believe what I just watched at that point. And I actually think it would have been horrifyingly beautiful in a way for a story that's how he got his revenge. That would have been so beyond dark. Or better yet, Thrag did it to both Debbie and now her ex-boyfriend. Could you imagine? But I fell for it totally, dude. Like, and it was such a relief when you realized it was Mark going crazy. And it kept happening with Mark's friends. I think we saw it with Cecil as well too, and his whole group, whatever it was. Like, I was waiting the entire episode for one of them to be real, and I thought it was Eve. I thought that after everything, Thrag was going to actually end up getting to Eve, but we ended up getting bamboozled there too, eh? And I might as well talk about that new subplot with Eve for a moment while I bring up Eve. Of course, Mark ended up coming back. She ended up gaining a bunch of weight in his absence. Mark was okay with it, and it turns out that, of course, and we knew this, but Mark didn't know this, that her powers weren't working because she was pregnant. And it's weird because she had this entire speech about not being ready for a baby and things like that. I would like to know if this was in the comics, but I also don't want to be spoiled by the comics for those of you who like the comics, or if this is just the media end up squeezing something like this in because it feels unnecessary. One could argue, and I would never make such a disgusting point myself, ever, right? Ever. Crazy people, okay? But one could argue that if two people are always fucking like rabbits in a bunch of scenes and end up bringing new life to the world, you should accept that responsibility. But of course, I would never in a million years make such an argument. Only crazy people would say such a thing. Yeah, insane. But honestly, like, I did kind of feel that whole plot point was unnecessary. It would be one thing if Mark returned home and he learned that he had a kid. That would be interesting. But with Eve just talking about an abortion, like, I don't know. But either way, to wrap up things over here, we have Nolan and Debbie going back to space to end up finding Oliver. Actually, before that too, I forgot to mention this. Before that, Nolan had an interesting conversation with Cecil. Cecil just showed up and gave him a piece of his mind, dude. Nolan was visiting the spot where I guess you could say he turned Mark into an adult. And Cecil showed up and kind of put him in his place. And I forgot to mention too, like, I forgot to mention that I enjoyed the conversation Nolan had with the guy who makes his suits. And he had to tell Nolan that he only dressed heroes. And you could see that after Nolan ended up taking off, how scared he actually was to speak to him. Like, I like those little touches a lot. But Cecil straight up told Nolan, like, I will never stop being afraid of you, ever. And when Nolan tried to face some of that disrespect by saying, like, I risked my life, I almost died, Cecil hit him with the, like, and I know it wasn't the right number, but like, yeah, only almost die a million more times than we can talk. Now get the fuck off my planet. Like, that hit hard. And again, it shows that there really isn't a way that Nolan can kind of make anything better. Like, I feel for the guy, but I'm ultimately on Cecil's side. Either way, this is where they end up going to go see Oliver. And I would imagine that this is where Nolan and Debbie's relationship might repair just a little bit. And what's funny about this too is that Debbie was just so hateful towards Nolan, but she let him carry her up to space while Mark was completely capable of doing so. Actually, Eve was probably capable of doing it too. I wonder if in her heart she's still carrying love, but she's been keeping herself together on the ship. Keeping to herself. And Nolan told her to look out the window for a view. And what I loved about this is that Nolan didn't selfishly try to win her over with the whole, like, out-of-world experience that she might be feeling. He ended up reaching for Debbie, and then he kept to himself, and that further proves that he is really becoming a changed man. Like I said earlier, like, I would imagine that there's going to be a point down the road where he ends up sacrificing himself for Debbie. And after that is where the big ending ends up taking place. Eve ends up telling Mark to go for a flight to end up clearing his head, and he does it, right? He does it, and everything seems relatively peaceful given the circumstances. We're listening to some music as we usually do with Invincible. He sees Thrag, and I'm just thinking at this point, okay, this has to be real this time. Once we got to Eve being torn apart, I was like, this is it. I've been tricked too many times with it, and finally, I was right. Thrag was actually there. And Mark immediately jumped into action, but quickly realized that he couldn't do anything to Thrag. I forgot to mention, too, that first fight, like, it was so cool. He punches him, and you could just see, like, a devil, you know? I love it, man. And especially after everyone just took off, it's just Mark that's left. He can't do anything. So Thrag ended up presenting him with a big ultimatum. Either let them stay, hide, and breed until they're strong again, or they will destroy the entire planet. Mark was immediately screaming no, of course, at him, refusing over and over again, trying to fight, until he started thinking about it. He thought about his friends, he thought about Eve, he thought about all of the people that would die. So he had no choice, as kind of like Thrag expressed, and he reluctantly accepted his terms. And the poor guy, man, he already has so much in his heart to carry. Now add to this, I'm curious as if he'll keep it to himself next season, or if he'll tell people like Nolan, and then they'll just end up having internal conflicts with the coalition. Like, there's a lot that they can work with moving forward. If I had to guess with this whole thing, I would imagine that Mark would probably keep it to himself for a small period of time, like maybe another season. Supposedly, we have like 8, 9, 11 seasons coming with the show, something like that. So I'm sure he's going to sit on that information and just kind of suffer. We have that, plus we have that one guy in the tomb that I never touched on. Damien Darkblood is doing something else. Angstrom is still going to come back at some point, and I'm sure there's probably more to do in space. My guess is that moving forward, the Viltrum storyline is going to take a pause while this other stuff resurfaces and Mark continues to go through a bunch of mental struggles. That's my guess, but with this season 4 over here, we're not quite done just yet, because the season ended up closing with Alan receiving an encrypted message from Thetis telling him to release the perfected version of the Scourge virus. Actually, sorry to put a pause on this. I just thought about Alan real quick. The season was also very funny. I don't think that I mentioned that at all. It's just like the quick humor, whether it's between like Zoe and Alan or Alan and Nolan, and just I loved the picture each time with Nolan like this as Alan and his girl were just screwing. Like, I loved it. It was all funny, man. There was like a lot, and Invincible's very good at this. There was a lot that was hidden throughout the season that kind of just made you laugh in between everything that was going on. I just thought about it at the end because, like, with that conversation about the message, Alan's girl was kind of like, I'll just sex the information out of you later. And I was like, oh yeah, I'd like to see you try. But back on track. Sorry. Alan is now tasked to release the virus, and he is under a lot of pressure with the rest of Coalition to just find the Viltrumites, conclude the war. Will he do it? I don't know. That could lead to another very interesting storyline with Nolan kind of just, you know, taking on Alan himself. There's a little bit of a betrayal there. And if they find out that the Viltrumites on Earth, they express that the virus can kill humankind too. They like literally said something to the extent that it would be deadly to people like Mark's people. Either way, I can't wait to see it. Season 4 was the best of Invincible so far, in my opinion. I loved every second of it, and I am totally on board with the show, and I can officially say that it surpassed Better Call Saul as my 3rd favorite show of all time. If you guys want to hear me talk about all of my favorite shows, check out this video on screen right here. We break them all down into tier lists over here. If not, how about a Season 3 review for Invincible? I'd love to have you guys over there. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for your time today, everybody. Take care, guys.